Heyo guys, so a small announcement to start the video off with. While I do really appreciate the surge of Patreon requests we've gotten lately, no, seriously, I do. A lot. You guys should have seen my earnings last month. Believe me, that's appreciation you can literally tank to the bank. But other videos need to start making their way down the pipeline soon, and while Patreon quickies are awesome, they can get in the way of other stuff, so I already announced this over on Patreon and social media and whatnot, but until I can get caught up with things as far as Patreon requests go, Patreon requests are temporarily suspended. Just temporarily, don't freak out. More details in the link below. Cool? Okay, let's get this rolling. Okay, Stuck Out, another EP, alright. I used to be pretty down on reviewing these kind of things, but given A, my schedule for the past year or so, and B, that some obviously killer EPs came out and wrecked my shit last year, I've decided to be a bit more open-minded on this topic. Stuck Out are a new Australian act that haven't really released too much of anything, a single here and there. This is their closest thing to a debut at the moment, but even though they're a bit on the microscopic side, they've scored themselves some pretty decent gigs, playing with bigger acts like Hands Like Houses, Knuckle Puck, and Say Anything. Yep, people, in case you couldn't already tell, we're dealing in pop punk. Though with these guys, I don't know how comfortably a label like that even fits them. They're pop punk for sure, but with a more definitive alt-rock slant. This isn't pizza-memed, Chuck Taylor high-topped pop punk classic. This is a slice of that newer stuff we've been seeing from groups like Gospel Youth and the Wonder Years. The writing, mixing, and song construction is much more nuanced and rich. It's a bit more mature than your average pop punk act. I know it sounds like those two things kinda don't go together, but I mean, you all have heard Gospel Youth and the Wonder Years, right? So yeah, this formula totally works when done right, and I'd say that, yeah, Stuck Out is another band that's sticking out. Oh god, I actually wrote that. Somebody paid for this review, that poor guy. There's some very nice open chord work and layering being done between the guitars here. Stuck Out is a 2-guitar act, and while there isn't a lot in terms of licks, soloing, or lead work, they both condense their rhythm playing into a thick, heavy, and dominating kind of feel. It's got heft to it, even if it won't impress the more technically minded people out there. I mean, I've seen pop punk 5 pieces do way less with way more, so yeah, I'm gonna give credit where it's due. Josh Walker's voice is also a nice fit for this kind of sound. His pipes are a bit on the throaty side. Well, throaty by pop punk standards at least. His voice has a roughness and character to it that helps it stick out. Oh, fuck, he's another strong asset this group has, and he's another reason I think we might be hearing steady buzz from these guys in the future. I could see it happening. You Won't Come Home impressed me a fair bit. The only major complaint I have here is the same complaint I usually have with a lot of EPs, and that there's just not enough of it. The album is kinda split in two, with the first 3 songs being on the harder side and things mellowing out with slower numbers for the back end. But it works well enough. It shows us that the band is good with dynamics and that they'll be able to pull off lots of other cool tricks in the future. But the future isn't here yet, so for now all we have is this little morsel. And if I'm being completely honest, it didn't quite wow me like some of the other EPs I've heard in the past have. I mean, as much as I liked it, this is no thanks, sorry, sure. But hey, while we're waiting for yarn, this'll certainly tide you over until then. You Won't Come Home gets 4 appetizers out of 5. Pop punk crash, short melodies crash, simplistic arrangements crash. Fuck you, Crash. Give us some of that sweet, overly complex, overly arranged, overly bombastic prog rock already, would ya? Okay, fine. How's this? Extremities, a Dutch act, another one of those bands that's super tiny and super hard to do research for as a result. Ugh. But from what I could find, these guys fancy themselves as groove prog and list influences such as Gojira, Tesseract, and Periphery. And yeah, I'd say I can see that. They're a band that love to play with the very heavy dynamics of metal. Their opening tracks really lay that point across. They definitely love shifting tempos, time signatures, and moods. They aren't a band that's afraid to play fast and loose with the rules though, which is good, but oh, I just gotta say it, especially on some of those heavier moments, their influences shine through a little too clearly. Like, man, like some of the thicker moments on this album, you'll swear you're just listening to the discount version of a Gojira record. But if you're the kind of person that, let's just say always has to buy the name brand stuff, this can totally feel like a generic. Really, it shines a bit brighter when their leaner, meaner moments kick in and vocalist Timo Franson gets to exercise his clean pipes a bit. Credit where it's due, the guy has a nice flexible range and can handle both the shrieking and straight singing parts of this album pretty well, though again, you can really see the seams of their influences sticking out of the fabric. Cleaner moments even sound a lot like Periphery or Tesseract. Again, if you listen to this and just end up feeling like you'd rather put on Polaris or Juggernaut, I can't say I blame you. It's one of those albums that feels really derivative. It's got this unoriginal kind of heard this all before, seen this all before kind of feel to it, but they're copying a lot of guys I like, so I don't know, even if it's kind of a knockoff, it's a pretty good one, so I'm willing to be a little kinder to it. I will say that it all becomes way too much by the ending track, the Inward Eye, all 18 goddamn minutes of it. It's not the most insufferable long prog track I've ever heard, but if you're gonna make an album where one track makes up a third of the running length, that motherfucker better be golden from start to finish, and 2112, this ain't. I don't know, this is one of those albums that's certainly flawed, but not in an uncharming or unappealing way. I can definitely see more open-minded prog heads being more kind to this than maybe I can. If you consider yourself to be in that particular camp and you're jonesing for something and feeling brave, I can recommend giving it a try. But if not, I wouldn't say you're missing out on your new favorite group or anything. It's good for what it is, but what it is, man, it certainly ain't gonna be for everybody. Hey, maybe if these guys can work on being a little bit more original, maybe we'll hear better things from them. But until then, it's not like From Mars to Sirius is gone anywhere. Gaia gets 3 Malto meals out of 5. Oh yeah, this album. This is actually kind of a special request. This one comes to us via Spectrum ZX. Pulse! I meant Spectrum Pulse. I cannot be the only one old and dorky enough to have made this mistake before, can I? This is something Mark went out of his way to pay for and request. Sincerely, dude, thank you. And also, can I throw down like a double thank you for requesting this specifically? Because this thing just might make the tippy top of my albums of the year list. Holy shit, I dug the hell out of this album. Was this penance for inadvertently turning me towards AJR last year? I already told you, pay for my therapy bills or GTFO. Kyle Craft, can't say I was familiar with the guy before walking into this, though I will say the initial research I did didn't have me all that excited. Southern rock guy, apparently? 70s inspired music and album covers, not that there's anything wrong with that, but so many people do it wrong. And, oh come on, that thing on his head is not hair. That is an offen pincher. I figured, worst case scenario, we were looking at another dude who wanted to be Johnny Cash, but was one mediocre drummer away from being another one of those damn duo bands that haunted me from last year. But to my shock, Kraft's classic rock chops here are crazy legit. Man, this was impressive. Kyle's music is cut from the cloth of the Rolling Stones, Dylan's electric period, the 70s genesis of glam rock, and just the slightest tinges of the boogier grooves from guys like Bowie and Elton John, and it's all layered over this just barely noticeable undercurrent of old school southern rock jamminess and alt country familiarity. Kyle strikes me as the kind of artist who knows his shit. He sounds like he's actually gone back and listened to all those old Tammy Wynette and Conway Twitty albums and not just heard about them secondhand through Jack White. The music here has a full, sweeping, and rich kind of affectation, but at the same time it's all rooted in this almost humble, sort of comfortable sounding sense of Americana, the likes of which would give Father John Misty a run for his money, like legit. Lots of bright and bouncy piano work, bold and vivacious use of acoustic guitars, brash organ work, subtle accentuation with slide guitars and banjos here and there. Seriously, it's a record that has that old school feel, but has a much more energetic and peppy lifeblood kicking in it. I didn't make the Father John Misty comparison here lightly. This is basically what good old Jay Tillman might sound like if somebody hugged him every once in a while. And if you remember how I felt about pure comedy by the end of the year, yeah, dude, I'm all about that. Another thing I can kinda compare Kraft to Father John on, but also kinda not really, are his lyrics. Man, this guy knows how to write a song that'll just make you feel it. Though, unlike FJM, the feeling isn't so much apocalyptic nihilism as it is just good old-fashioned fucked up romanticism. This album has an autobiographical slant to it, and about 99% of it focuses on relationships gone terribly wrong in one way or another, but Kyle just sells every ounce of it. He sings about the wild, free-spirited women he often finds himself with, and the wake of destruction him and her end up leaving in each other's paths, with such conviction and realness that you know you're not listening to a fancy bit of prose. This shit is all something that probably actually happened. This girl he's singing about has a name. Though, you know, it's one of 20 different names depending on where she goes. Believe it or not, I actually do love a good retro throwback when it's actually done right. Kraft is an analog kid in a digital world. The music he's making has that old school soul and spirit that so many others try and fail to capture, but Kyle gets it, and he's delivered something crazy goddamn scrumptious on this album. The next time somebody tells me to, give the Black Keys a break, man, I'm shoving this album right down their goddamn throats. This is how you do it right, people. Full Circle Nightmare gets 5 reel-to-reels out of 5. Tiny moving parts, eh? Well, your tiniest moving part isn't looking so hot there, Chief. 0 out of 10. Worst band name ever. Who the fuck still makes this hand gesture? Apparently these guys are another one of those sort of pop-punky, but more emo revival-ish bands that have been chugging along for a little while now, but have somehow just completely slipped under my radar. Man, if you people all miss emo so much, why the hell did you let it die in the first place? Okay, that question answered itself, but I was impressed when I heard what was on this album. And I'll tell you the main reason I was so impressed, and its name is Dylan Mathisen? I tried. See, what I usually do with bands I've never heard of is I listen to the music first, and then follow up with the research. What I hear on the album really justifies whether or not your band is worth the research, but I listened to this thing and was blown away by Dylan's crazy good guitar work. His riffing on this thing is really something. He flies across the fretboard like it's a whack-a-mole game set on nightmare difficulty. It's the same kind of lightning-quick shredding we see on other math-rocky type of bands, such as Dance Gavin Dance or Fall of Troy, that if you've been watching my show over the past 3 years or so, you know I've taken quite a keen towards. And here it is again, only in something that's tailored to be a bit more user-friendly? The album is technically gorgeous in its guitar work. The lead guitar is where most of the muscle flexes on this thing, but things like the drums, the bass, the overall song structure, I don't know how to phrase this without it sounding like I'm docking points for it, but they aren't as crazy. Like, this band totally will fly off the handle, but they don't always have to. They tend to streamline things a bit, particularly in choruses and the hookier moments of songs. So when those moments come around where the song really needs a hook and it needs to be simple and memorable, it is, and it works. And you know, that is an issue that bands of this nature can run into. Yeah, Dance Gavin Dance can make for some technically impressive stuff, but I don't know, from a raw song construction standpoint, a lot of it is just overwhelming. It all just swells and becomes layers and layers of until you just get this massive, ungodly eldritch horror of, wow, I could probably never do that. There is more to making successful music than just raw technical skill. If there weren't, we'd all remember Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe over Motley Crue. When the truth is neither of those bands deserve to be remembered, this band is sort of a get you a man that can do both kind of band. They've got enough skill to please people who recite scale patterns like prayers, and the people that are just looking for something catchy to bop to. Hey, they get what they want too. It's a nice sort of everybody wins scenario. If you can't already tell, I did rather enjoy this. From what I understand, this is an album that's been turning a lot of heads for these guys too. And hey, more power to them. I'd say they've earned it. Here's hoping they can build on this momentum and give us something even better in the future. Swell gets 4 Weedly Wees out of 5. Who? Oh no, this is another band like Extremities, isn't it? A band that's so small, even Googling them is a small nightmare. Most searches for the term Purest of Pain bring up this song by something called Sun by 4, and well, it beats the hell out of Despacito, I guess. But no, the place where I found the most information regarding this album was, weirdly enough, on Indiegogo. Oh no, this isn't an episode of Kick Scammers, is it? Am I the only one who watches Slope's Game Room here? Anybody? But no, Purest of Pain, the non-salsa variety, that is a Dutch melodeath group that formed all the way back in 2008. They've been grinding out the past 10 years or so in the underground, and with the help of crowdfunding, they were finally able to get their full-length debut off the ground. Just like how crowdfunding helped make this review happen. Hey, ain't that something? So yeah, the story behind this album, at least, is totally one of those little guy conquers all kind of stories, and everyone likes a good underdog, right? So has 10 years of hard work and diligent support from their fan base paid off? Is this the next big thing? Well, it's not so much about the eye of the tiger as it is the thrill of the fight, to put it one way. Like, I really wanted to enjoy this album more than I did. Make no mistake, these guys are doing some very good things here. Solipsism is the philosophical idea that only one's mind is sure to exist, and that the knowledge of anything outside of one's own mind is at best uncertain and at most opaque, or perhaps even non-existent. Probably the most well-known and influential splinters of this type of thought being Cartesian dualism and Descartes' cogito ergo sum. It seeks to ask the questions of how can you know who you are when the only real knowledge and experiences you've ever had are intrinsically yours? How does one really know themselves when reality itself may very well be an unanswerable question, or even a full-blown clarion falsehood? And I was at best a B minus student in my philosophy classes. It's probably best if I went back to saying the funny swear words and the poopy jokes now. Butt fart! The album doesn't pull any punches when it comes to discussing more thought-provoking subject matter, and you know what? I'm gonna give them credit for punching as high as they do, and not patronizing their audience. I mean, not every song is an absolute head-scratcher either. I'm pretty sure anyone can guess what's going on in Crown of Worms just fine. But when they do step outside the lines, I gotta say, they handle things very well. And they cover a wide variety of topics, from the philosophical to the psychological to the more traditional, and hey, they pull it off without sounding like they're buried 40 miles up their own ass. That's hard to pull off, so again, credit where it's due. This is one of those albums I found very interesting lyrically. Just a shame about the music though. It's MDM, which, hey, you know me, I'm all about that, but it's just like okay sounding MDM. Again, there's a similar issue to what Extremities had with their album, in that its influences are just a little too clear to see. Dash in a bit of At the Gates, a bit of Arch Enemy, sprinkle in a little Dark Tranquility to taste, and bam, you've practically already heard this album. Not to mention the production doesn't really do it any favors. Oh, I know, they're an unsigned band that had to Indiegogo their album into existence. I should be nicer about that, but oh, the bass is super mushy, the vocals are way too forward in the mix, and I hate it when small shit like that keeps me from liking an album, but it is a very real problem, and it's something that is gonna get in the way if you go into this blind. There's a lot to respect and admire about this project. Sincerely, I hope this album gets some kind of buzz and helps them find their way to a good label, or at least a decent producer. I feel like in the right hands, we could see these guys doing some pretty damn impressive things. But man, at this stage, they're just begging for more polish. But hey, most of the best bands in the world have some of the roughest early albums. If you're big into MDM or want something that's gonna give your mind a bit of an exercise, believe me, you could do worse. Solipsis gets 3 George Berkeleys out of 5. With this album, it is genuinely intelligent and it will get you thinking. Unlike with... people, help me out here. Why does anyone still listen to Ministry? I have just never seen this band's appeal. I remember hearing these guys as far back as 1991. Ministry was probably one of my first introductions into industrial music. But even back then, I hated it. I, honest to God, just thought I hated industrial music for the longest time, until KMFDM, Rammstein, and 9 Inch Nails set me straight. Depending on who you talk to, that means I just don't like the right kind of industrial music, to which I say fuck off and kiss me right on the downward spiral. I don't know, when I talk to people about industrial metal, Ministry is almost always one of the first names that people bring up. They were one of the early godfathers of the genre, and they helped it cross over and become a much bigger deal. And for its time, I'm sure it was fine and dandy, but man, when I went back over Land of Rape and Honey, Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste, and Psalm 69, these album titles, for real. Yeah, it really wasn't my thing. I don't know. Like, it sounds okay, but it also sounds super dated in my opinion. But here's the thing. I went to Twitter and actually reached out to people who actually do get Ministry better than I do, and I begged them to show me what their appeal was. I got some very interesting answers here and there, and it did help make things a bit more understandable, but the nearly universal sentiment that came along with most of their input, even though I didn't directly ask for it, was, "Oh, but the new album sucks, so don't sweat it." Whew, glad it's not just me. Man, people, this album is fucking dumb. I get the feeling most people probably don't mind this band being dumb, but this is a special flavor of dumb. I'm sorry. I swear to God, this thing is at least 80% samples. It's just samples over samples over samples. The album opens with like 5 goddamn straight minutes of Trump samples. And it's all layered over some of the most new metal, Limp Bizkit ass sounding turntable scratches that I've heard since the actual Limp Bizkit. Like, is my memory just hazy? Because I sure as hell don't remember any of that shit on the good Ministry albums. What the hell is it doing here? Al, if you're gonna bring your band back from the dead, a good move would also be to get the music out of 2003. Like, I go on and on about the sampling, but guys, it's like really that bad. It's shocking. Victims of a Clown pulls the old trick of sampling the ending speech from The Great Dictator over music, to which I say Propagandhi did it first, did it better, and no, Al, just no. No, Al. And all of these shitty, lazy, crappy samples just bombard you over the head constantly, unceasingly. The album never fucking lets up. There are 4 tracks on this thing that breach well over the 6-minute mark, usually over the 8-minute mark, but every single one of them goes absolutely nowhere. I'm not against a song being long, but if you're going to take that long to get somewhere, we better goddamn well get somewhere. Look at the lyrics of Twilight Zone and tell me how that justifies being 8 goddamn minutes long. I could have listened to I Am a Rifle 4 times in that span. Though, as much as I hate it, I sort of understand why Al has resorted to being so sample heavy on this work, because good God, he sounds old and tired as hell. Al was never Freddie Mercury or anything, but on this album specifically, he can barely eke out his growls through all his lip piercings anymore. They have his vocals placed way in the back, and believe me, it's for good reason. If this is what Al sounds like these days, those shows with death grips must have been downright humiliating. And look, I get it. The dude clearly hates Trump, and he hates the current political climate. Hey, you're preaching to the choir over here. I can't stand the motherfucker. But when the music is this fucking bad, man, you really aren't helping. See, that's what rubs my ass about this album the most. It's a stupid ass Ministry album, but it thinks it's fucking brilliant. I made a joke earlier about Ministry's early album titles, yeah, but really, that is when Ministry works best, when it's an open and unashamed celebration of its own hedonistic stupidity. I get why that Ministry works. Al Jorgensen wrangling everybody in close and saying, "Hey guys, let's get serious for a bit." It plays like Barney the dinosaur teaching kids sex ed. Man, Al, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but this Bill Maher shit just isn't helping, dude. Prophets of Rage, all is forgiven. Like, damn. Amerikkkant gets 1.5 shitty Twitter arguments out of 5. Ducking Punches. Don't feel bad, I hadn't heard of them either, but apparently they're an English band that's been making some waves here and there. Apparently they served as the opening act for the Smith Street Band on their last tour. Pretty cool, right? So how are these guys? Well, you can definitely tell they're English. Just listen to that accent. We're driving out to our favorite smoking spot. That is some premium Gallagher levels of English twang. Given how thick Will Wagner lays out his Aussie brogue in his music, yeah, this feels like a fitting opener for them, doesn't it? That's kind of weird. They also make a perfect opening act for these guys because they totally have that folk punky, pub rocky kind of vibe going for them too. And as you guys know, I'm a pretty big fan of that kind of thing, but again, like Purest of Pain, I really wanted to like this album more than I ended up actually liking it. And you know, in this case it sucks because I can't even really put a finger on what it is that isn't clicking for me. The music is fine overall. Like I mentioned up top, Dan Allen's voice is certainly something you gotta get used to, but you do get used to it fairly quick. The instrumentation is also very nice all around. The guitars make very nice shifts from clean and crystalline to harsh and chunky with a good sense of flow and vibrancy. The bass and drums fill out the rhythm section okay. The lyrics are kind of standard affair for this, a little cheeky, but mostly sincere without being insufferable. I can't put down one thing that this band actually does that's too terribly wrong. They're actually a pretty well-rounded little group.
Well, that sounds good to me, Crash. What the hell is your problem?
Well, see, that's the thing. They don't do anything terribly wrong, but they also don't do anything terribly right. While their music is proficient, apart from the occasional really good guitar part here or nice downbeat there, etc., the music is also mostly kind of underwhelming. Or at least I've heard much better things done in this particular genre. The music's fine, but it doesn't have that playful snideness of something like the Front Bottoms or Smith Street, nor does it really have the lyrical weight or heft of something like the Gaslight Anthem or Frank Turner. It's just kinda there. Now, you know how in the worst games, movies, and books, etc., there's always that one girl character that can basically just be described as there. She's there too. There is girl. Girl is there. Well, to me, this album felt like the equivalent of that. Album is here. There is album. Album is here. It's an album that certainly is. I don't know, this thing just did not rub off on me. It doesn't have much of a sting or a lasting effect. And given how much of an easy lay I usually am for this particular genre, that's a little disquieting. It's possible it hasn't grown on me, or maybe I just don't get it, man. I mean, that's entirely possible, but man, the best kind of music can overcome your bullshit. Kyle Kraft didn't need any help shining through despite my bullshit, and this album, it hasn't hooked me, I'm sorry. Your mileage might definitely vary here. I don't know, my 2 cents, it just wasn't clicking. I mean, you could certainly do worse things with your time. Fuck, I'd recommend this 7 times over Ministry. Alamort gets 3 half-dead exhausted feelings out of 5. That's what Alamort means. Yeah, I had to look it up too. I thought it was some kind of beverage. The fuck do I know? Wow, another band I've never fucking heard of before today? I'm starting to think I'm the lamest motherfucker on the planet. Of the 9 bands I'm covering in this quickie, 7 of them are news to me. Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong. But yeah, Don Broco here, an English band that supported acts like Enter Shikari and Bring Me the Horizon. 2 bands I've been pretty supportive of in the past. Very supportive of in some cases. So based on that alone, let me guess, alt-rock band with a really dense soundscape and a heavy emphasis on atmosphere and electronic accentuation. Hey, wouldn't you know it, I'm not so out of touch. So yeah, this is also something that's kinda up my street. And you know, I can say I dig it, at least to a certain extent. Like most albums in this particular little subgenre, the mix is absolutely gorgeous. Guitars roar, bass quakes, drums, both electronic and canvas, bring out some nice groove-centric beats, and the vocals, even though Rob Damiani is not exactly what I'd call a powerhouse vocalist, are performed decently enough. It's a damn solid album on a raw musical level. I think fans of stuff like Shikari and Horizon will definitely find something they like here. But I need to put a big emphasis on the word some. See, Shikari and Horizon lyrically can touch on some interesting themes and discuss some pretty lofty topics and ideas. Hell, Shikari's record was so damn stellar at that, I gave it Album of the Chuffing Year. But Don Broco? Ooh, they are so not interested in any of that. Let's cut to the chase. This album is also super dumb. Like, really dumb. I bet I got at least 1 or 2 comments saying,
Crash, how dare you say Bring Me the Horizon has interesting lyrics? I mean, really?
And you know, fair enough, but give this thing a listen and it'll make That's the Spirit sound like motherfucking Kierkegaard. It's mostly songs about partying and thinking about partying and being miserable while partying and being hungover after partying, and no, it's not in that fun Andrew WK sense either. There's a hedonistic kind of appeal to the stuff they write, though. It's not Motley Crue or anything, but these guys have a lot of goals they try to hit lyrically, and thoughtfulness isn't exactly one of them. Again, it's not an inherently bad thing, though I could see it rubbing some listeners the wrong way. And you know, for all my nanny-sounding talking down about that aspect of the album, I actually did find myself not minding it as much as I thought I was going to. Hell, stuff like the title track, T-shirt song, and Something to Drink really did end up hitting home for me. I enjoyed those songs. There's probably about 3 to 5, maybe 6 songs on this album that I can say are pretty damn good. It's a damn shame the album has 16. Like, damn, this album does not need to be as long as it is. Cut this motherfucker in half and I'd be way kinder to it. Man, no matter how kickin' your party might be, by the time 4 or 5 a.m. rolls around, I just want to fucking go home. This album has way too much filler on it. This is a record that you'll find maybe half a dozen songs or so that are worth your time, but that's it. It's padded, crazy padded. I would say pick up the tracks that you like from this thing individually and chuck the rest of it off. The bits of actual meat in this steak are fairly tasty, but man, this is a fatty ass cut of meat. Technology gets 3.5 Porkies out of 5. Oh, thank Jesus, a band I actually know and have heard of. Ha! Finally! Oh god, I am so out of touch. Cane Hill! I've made reference to these guys here and there. Their debut Smile back in 2016 turned more than a few heads. Most of you longtime watchers know that I actually used footage of them in my best worst list of 2016 instead of footage from King 810 that year, because fuck these goddamn psychopaths. I'm not giving them free publicity. But a lot of questions concerning my particular thoughts on the band inevitably came rolling in, and while I'm about 2 years too late here, Smile, in my opinion at least, like 3.5 out of 5. The band clearly had intensity, passion, and an absolutely demolishing sound, but they had a bit of growing up to do. Ew! It wasn't the best thing I've ever heard, but they clearly had potential. I figured if they could maybe ease up on the more juvenile hijinks, there might be some genuine promise in there, but I mean, asking your typical nu metal band to be more mature is like asking the tide if it could very kindly not come in today, thank you. But hey, miracles do happen, and I will be good god gravy damned if that didn't happen here. Wow! Cane Hill grew the fuck up. The band has retained all that force, energy, rawness, and intensity that we saw in their debut, but believe it or not, they've graduated from writing songs about blowing loads into people and giggling about it. I mean, say what you want, but even Korn can't say they ever did that. They do a pretty decent job on this album lyrically. Erased is a touching screed on dementia and the effects it had on drummer Devin Clark's grandfather and his family. 10 Cent is about growing up and watching all your heroes either die off or fade away, something I think most of us can sadly relate to these days. And Scumbag is Cane Hill at their absolute most vicious, condemning the current political climate and the rise of new Nazism. God damn it, Ministry! Cane Hill was able to accomplish in 1 minute 57 seconds what you couldn't do in 3/4 of an hour. Ow! For fuck's sake, dude, take notes! They even go as far as to stretch out their sound and breach into some new territory. My favorite track off this album has to be Singin' in the Swamp, and I love it because, man, it's just so not Cane Hill. There's a focus on atmosphere and loftiness. It's a colorful song with some gorgeous vocal layering and subtle guitar harmonies that still also retains a goddamn good deal of that pickaxe to the face Cane Hill style. It's a cocktail that I was sure wasn't going to work, like an Earl Grey martini, but man, when I heard this track in execution, I was immediately sold. This is pulled off splendorously well. Or maybe I'm just an alcoholic, I don't know. Not that the band has gone all REM on us or anything, this is still Cane Hill. This is still nu metal, and the emphasis is still firmly, solidly on BOOM! Lord of Flies and Hateful can basically be summed up as, well, fuck you too songs, and the title track is really just a story about taking too much LSD and tripping balls. While the album certainly does have its moments, on the whole, I wouldn't say it's deep or thought-provoking, but hey, what they lack in depth, they make up for big time in punch and tenacity. And believe me, this is a huge step up from the stuff we got on Smile. Cane Hill is still a very new band, but they're definitely shaping up to be the good kind of second wave nu metal act. The Fire from the Gods, the Wage War, the Chrysalis kind of second wave nu metal act. It shows that these guys are not only willing to learn, but also capable of growing into something much more interesting and substantial. I think this was the album that finally sold me on this act. These guys are officially on my watch list. Too Far Gone was great and legit. Don't be shocked if this album becomes another dark horse for my best of 2018 list. Too Far Gone gets 4.5 cream pie martinis out of 5.
I'll just